Chapter 136. The Lifeline. Thorn. "Don't touch it!" Carol snapped, hitting my hand away from his neck. Her eyes were wide with panic as she seemed to be figuring what the bright light meant, and from her reaction, it was bad news. Someone on the other end has figured out that Riley has been drawing on a life force that doesn't belong to him. They're cutting the connection, she said, sounding panicked as she started squashing some herbs together, trying to form a paste. The necklace was glowing brighter now, hot enough that I could feel the heat radiating from it, even from several feet away. The metal was actually beginning to melt, drops of molten silver falling onto Riley's chest and hissing against his skin, but it didn't seem to be burning him and leaving marks, more like drying up quickly in exposed air. "What happens if they succeed in cutting it?" I asked, though I had a terrible feeling I already knew the answer. Carol's face was grim as she began pulling ingredients from her bag with desperate speed. "Bye-bye, Riley," she said simply, which made my heart skip a beat as I almost keeled over from the terror that coursed through me. This was very bad news. That connection has been the only thing keeping him alive. If it's severed completely, he'll die within minutes. She continued speaking, as I immediately nodded my head, wishing that I knew something that could help or could try and pause time so that we would have more on our side. She closed her eyes and placed both hands on Riley's chest, right over his heart. I watched carefully, silently rooting for her to win this battle. Words in a language I didn't recognize began flowing from her lips, growing louder and more urgent as the necklace continued to deteriorate. Burning and glowing at the same time as my eyes began to blur from the intensity of the light. A bright white light came out from her hands as well, startling me. It was so intense that I had to shield my eyes and turn away. The light seemed to pulse in rhythm with Riley's heartbeat, and I could feel power washing over me in waves that made my wolf instincts scream warnings about supernatural dangers. Through the blazing light, I could hear Carol's voice rising in what sounded like a battle cry, her words sharp and commanding as she fought against whatever force was trying to sever Riley's lifeline. The air around us was filled with competing energies, the healing magic Carol was pouring into the boy, and something darker, more malevolent, that was trying to drain him away. Someone was actively trying to poison the tether on the other end, trying to end his life faster to save whoever was on their end. The necklace finally disintegrated completely, falling away in molten drops that sizzled against the rocks. Riley's body arched upward as if he'd been struck by lightning, a gasp escaping his lips that was the first sound I'd heard him make since finding him here. "Is he?" I started to ask, but Carol held up one hand for silence, while keeping the other pressed against Riley's chest. The white light began to fade gradually, and I could see sweat beading on Carol's forehead from the effort she was exerting. Her breathing was labored, and I could tell that whatever she was doing was taking everything she had. "The connection is broken," she said finally, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "But he's lost so much life force that I don't know if what remains is enough to sustain him. I'm trying to anchor his spirit to his body, but—" Riley's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. He didn't seem to be aware of his surroundings. His lips moved as if he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, straining to hear if he was trying to say something. "Riley, can you hear me?" His eyes seemed to find mine, and with tremendous effort, he whispered a single word, "Ollie." Carol's eyes snapped open, meeting mine with sudden understanding. "They're connected," she breathed. "Life siphoning only happens when they are of the same blood. Not just magically. The fact that I assumed this was Ollie at first, this was twins. Somehow Ollie and Riley are twins. That's why breaking the connection was so dangerous. They've been sharing life force because they're two halves of the same whole." The implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. Twins. Riley and Ollie were twins, which meant— "Sophia stole him," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. She took one of Xenois's sons somehow and convinced him the boy was hers. And managed to fool all of us as well, because there was no talk about it being a twin pregnancy and then losing someone. Somehow she had managed to manipulate all this from the moment Lumina was pregnant. Carol nodded grimly, looking disgusted at what she was hearing. And now that the magical connection is broken, both boys are in danger. Riley because he's lost his anchor to life, and Ollie because he's been sustaining two people for months without realizing it. Riley's hand moved weakly, and I caught it in mine, feeling how cold his skin was. What can we do? We need to get him to someone who can perform a proper healing ritual. I am not sure that I would be able to pull this off without risking any more damage both to him and me. Carol said, already beginning to pack up her supplies. And we need to warn whoever is caring for Ollie that he's about to experience massive magical backlash. That sort of magical siphon has to go back somewhere, and I managed to cut the strings before it would hit us, which meant whoever was on the other end of this tether saved the little child's life, but the recoil is still coming. I pulled out my phone, realizing that I needed to call Xenois immediately. He needed to know that Riley was alive, that Sophia had tried to murder him, and that Ollie was in immediate danger from the magical forces that had been manipulating both boys. But as I dialed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late, that whatever was happening in that hospital room where Ollie lay dying was beyond anything a phone call could fix. Riley's grip on my hand tightened slightly, and I looked down to see him staring at me with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a child his age. "Tell him," Riley whispered, his voice barely audible. "Tell my father that I'm sorry." Chapter 137, The Broken Matriarch. Xenois. I paced the hospital corridor, frantically like I was a caged wolf, my feet walking up and down the familiar linoleum floor as my mind kept on going and thinking up worst-case scenarios. Every few minutes I'd check my phone, hoping for some miracle update from the search teams, but the screen remained blank, which was one of the things frustrating my life at the moment. Were all my men incompetent, or was this something stranger? There has been absolutely no calls, no texts, no sign that anyone had found even the smallest clue about where Riley might be. This was killing me slowly. The silence from Lumina was eating at me. I'd tried calling her 3 times in the past hour, needing to hear her voice, needing to know if there had been any change in Ollie's condition. I needed her to know that even if I wasn't rushing there quickly because of this Riley situation, my thoughts were still on them, and this wasn't a pick who was more important to me. Moment. But each call went straight to voicemail, leaving me to imagine the worst. Was she too devastated to answer me? Had she taken my absence as her answer about not needing me for anything ever again? Had Ollie taken a turn for the worse? The not knowing was slowly driving me insane. Thorne's sudden disappearance only added to my growing anxiety as well. One minute he'd been here helping me with the medical staff, and the next he was running out of the building with barely an explanation or a reason worth giving. I understood his need to investigate further, but having my beta abandon his post when I needed him most felt like another layer of abandonment in a day that was already full of them. I didn't want to sound like someone who was whining, but he should have taken me with him or made calls and texts as well to keep me updated. Anything at all to keep me from wallowing in my guilt here, and I didn't want to call him in case he was on something time-sensitive and needed a lot of concentration. I couldn't bring myself to go back into Sophia's room. Every time I looked at her, lying there in that hospital bed, playing the role of the grieving mother, I felt something dark and ugly twist in my stomach. Part of me wished it had been her the rogues had taken instead of Riley, and that thought made me sick with guilt. What kind of person wished harm on someone who just lost their child? What kind of man was I becoming? The sound of slow, measured footsteps made me look up from my pacing, and I saw my mother walking toward me down the hallway. Sylvia moved with unusual hesitancy, her normally confident stride replaced by something that looked almost lost. Her face was pale, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read. I rushed to meet her halfway, relief flooding through me at seeing a familiar face in this hospital. I knew that she was normally here for Sophia and would probably cuss me out, but it was better than nothing. "Mom, thank God you're here. I tried calling you earlier, but..." I stopped mid-sentence when I got close enough to see her clearly. There were tears rolling down my mother's face that she seemed unaware of. In all my years, I'd seen Sylvia cry maybe twice, and never like this. never with this kind of devastated and empty expression that made her look like she'd aged a decade in the span of hours. Even Zena's death. She has managed to maintain her composure in public, glaring at Lumina, but had broken down completely in the house afterwards. I remembered because she had held on to me and begged me not to leave her too. This was one of the reasons why I had a love-hate relationship with her. She was a cruel woman, but only to those who deserves it, and to her eyes, Lumina deserved it. But seeing her now, instead of the raging, ranting woman I had expected, I felt worried for her. "Mom?" I reached out to touch her arm, fear creeping into my voice. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She looked up at me as if she was having trouble focusing, blinking slowly like someone waking from a deep sleep. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Xenois." I assumed she was emotional about Riley's kidnapping, maybe overwhelmed by seeing Sophia in such a state. My mother had never been particularly fond of Sophia. Well, she was more supportive of her than Lumina, and to her, Sophia was the lesser evil in her eyes, but she wouldn't wish this kind of tragedy on anyone. "Sophia's going to be fine," I said quickly, trying to reassure her, despite my initial anticipation of being rebuked by her for not putting a closer eye on Sophia and Riley and instead spending all time trying to get Lumina back. "The doctors say her injuries aren't serious, and we're doing everything we can to find Riley. The search teams are still out there, and Thorne is investigating some new leads. We're not giving up." Sylvia stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with something. Some internal battle that was playing out behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded slowly, as if coming to some kind of decision. "Where is Thorne?" she asked, her voice still strangely flat. I frowned, confused by the question. "He went back to the woods where Riley was taken. He said he wanted to investigate something, but he didn't give me details." "Why?" My mother's expression shifted slightly, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like relief. "He's better off there," she said cryptically. "Better off in the woods with answers than here with questions." "Mom, you're scaring me," I said honestly. "What's going on? Did something happen when you were with Sophia?" Chapter 138, The Light in the Woods, Xenois. Sylvia reached out and placed her hand on my cheek, a gesture that should have been comforting, but somehow felt more like goodbye. My eyes narrowed at her at this. Was something going on? I wanted to open my mouth to ask her more, but she stopped me. "I'm here now," she said simply. "I'll take Sophia home tonight. You should go." "Go where?" "To the woods, to find the truth about what happened to Riley." Her eyes met mine directly for the first time since she'd arrived, and I saw something odd that has never been there before, almost like she was seeing everything from a new viewpoint. "The person who needs you most right now isn't in this hospital, Xenois. Riley needs his father." I felt something cold settle in my stomach at her words. "What do you mean? Riley is? The rogues took him. We don't even know if he's—" "Go," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength as she pushed me back with her hand as she continued speaking. "Trust me. Go to the woods and find Thorne. Find the answers you need." I searched her face, looking for some explanation for her strange behavior, but all I saw was a determination that reminded me of the mother who had raised me, strong, unwavering, protective of her family above all else. "Are you sure you can handle Sophia? She's been through a trauma and—" "I can handle Sophia," Sylvia said, and there was something almost grimly satisfied in her tone. "I've been handling women like her my entire life. Go, Xenois. Don't waste any more time here." I wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers to the 100 questions spinning through my mind, but something in my mother's manner convinced me that she was right. There was no time for me to waste here. I had stayed because I didn't want Sophia to be alone, especially when there was no news. But if my mum was here, then I would not feel guilty. Besides whatever was happening in those woods, whatever Thorne had discovered, it was more important than standing around this hospital waiting for news that might never come. I kissed her forehead quickly, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with her natural scent, something that I had used to identify her and found soothing since I was a child. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." She smiled then, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since she arrived. "Take care of yourself, son. And remember, Not everything is as it seems. I didn't understand what she meant by that, but I didn't have time to ask for clarification. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get to those woods, to find Thorn and discover what had sent him racing back there with such urgency. The drive back to Blackwood Forest felt both endless and too short. My mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios. Riley dead, Thorn injured, the search teams finding nothing but bodies. But underneath the fear, there was something else. A strange sense of anticipation that I couldn't explain. As I got closer to the forest, following the same route the search teams had taken earlier, I found myself thinking about my mother's tears, about her strange behavior and cryptic words, followed with behaviors that I have never expected from her before. She'd seemed almost relieved when I'd told her about Thorn's location, as if she'd been hoping he would be far away from whatever was happening at the hospital. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the light. It started as just a glow on the horizon, barely visible through the canopy of trees. At first, I thought it might be the search teams with their high-powered flashlights, but as I drove closer, the light grew brighter and more intense, taking on an otherworldly quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. By the time I reached the forest road, the light was so brilliant, it was like driving toward a small sun. The beam cut through the darkness with a precision that was hard to miss, rising from somewhere deep in the woods like a beacon calling me home. I had to swerve to avoid being completely blinded, pulling my car to the side of the road and throwing it into park. Even with my eyes squeezed shut, I could see the light through my eyelids, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. My wolf was going crazy, pacing back and forth in my mind and whimpering with a mixture of fear and recognition. This wasn't natural light. This was something else entirely, something that spoke to parts of my soul I'd thought were buried and forgotten. I climbed out of the car on shaking legs, using my hands to shield my eyes as I tried to locate the source of the illumination. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the cliff, the same area where Sophia claimed the rogues had attacked them. As I stumbled through the underbrush, following game trails and trying not to trip over exposed roots, I found myself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Riley's sudden appearance in my life, Ollie's unexplained illnesses, the way I'd felt pulled in two different directions for months without understanding why. The light was so bright now that I could see individual leaves on the trees, could make out the texture of bark and the patterns of moss growing on fallen logs. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like standing at the edge of something infinite and unknowable. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light began to fade. I ran toward where it had been strongest, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen branches in my desperation to reach whatever was happening before it was too late. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the sound of my footsteps and ragged breathing. When I finally broke through the tree line and reached the cliff edge, I saw them. Thorn was kneeling beside a small figure on the rocks below, and next to them was a woman I didn't recognize, her hands glowing with residual magical energy. But it was the child between them that made my legs give out, sending me sliding down the rocky slope without caring about the cuts and bruises I was accumulating. Riley. My son was found. Chapter 139. The Realization. I stood motionless in the hospital parking lot, watching my son's taillights disappear into the darkness as he drove toward the forest. The weight of what I had overheard earlier in the hallway pressed down on my chest like a physical burden, which in turn made every breath that I took feel labored and painful. My hands were still shaking from the shock of it all, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and clench my fists until my nails bit into my palms, spilling blood. There would be time to fall apart later. Right now, I had work to do. I turned back toward the hospital entrance, my mind already shifting into the calculated mode I'd perfected over decades of pack politics and social maneuvering. The performance I was about to give would require every ounce of acting ability I possessed, but I'd been playing roles my entire life. This one just happened to matter more than most. The hallway leading to Sophia's room felt endless as I walked back, my footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. I could hear voices coming from inside, the doctor's professional tones mixed with Sophia's artificially weak responses. Perfect timing. I pushed open the door and immediately arranged my features into an expression of maternal concern. "How is she, doctor?" I asked, rushing to Sophia's bedside with what I hoped looked like genuine worry. "Mrs. Blackwood is recovering well," the doctor replied, making notes on his clipboard. "The head injury was minor, mostly superficial. She's been cleared for discharge whenever she feels ready to leave." Sophia looked up at me with eyes that sparkled with fake tears, her lower lip trembling in a performance that would have been convincing if I hadn't known the truth. "Oh, Sylvia," she whispered, reaching out to grasp my hand. "Thank you for coming. I was so hoping Xenois would be here when I woke up. We need each other now more than ever." The touch of her skin against mine made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to squeeze her fingers gently. "Xenois wanted to be here," I lied smoothly, "but he felt his time was better spent coordinating the search efforts. He asked me to look after you tonight while he's out there trying to find Riley." For just a moment, I caught something flash quickly across Sophia's face: annoyance, frustration, maybe even anger that her carefully laid plans were not going exactly as she'd envisioned. But she recovered quickly, her expression shifting back into the mask of a grief-stricken mother. "Of course," her voice breaking slightly as she sobbed. "He's such a good man, so devoted to finding our son. I feel so helpless lying here while my baby is out there somewhere, probably scared and alone." The word "our" grated against my ears like nails on a chalkboard, but I maintained my concerned expression. "The doctors want you to rest, dear. Let me handle the discharge paperwork and get you somewhere comfortable. You'll need your strength for when Riley comes home." Sophia nodded gratefully, apparently buying my act completely. I spent the next 20 minutes dealing with hospital papers, paying her bills and signing forms while she sat in a wheelchair looking like she was fragile and traumatized. Every minute felt like an eternity to me, but I forced myself to move at a normal pace to maintain the illusion that this was nothing more than one concerned family member helping another. Finally, we were in my car, pulling out of the hospital parking lot and heading toward the part of town where I lived with my husband Samuel. Sophia had asked to go back to Xenois's house, but I'd convinced her that she needed somewhere quiet to recover, somewhere without painful memories of Riley. As I drove through the darkened streets, my mind kept replaying what I'd overheard in that hospital room. I'd arrived at the hospital fully prepared to blame my son for his carelessness, angry that he'd allowed rogues to get close enough to threaten his family. The story made sense. Xenois had been distracted by his concerns for Ollie and Lumina, and predators had taken advantage of his divided attention. I'd gone straight to Sophia's room, ready to offer comfort and support to a woman who just lost her child, regardless of my actual personal feelings about her, the ones that I keep hidden because in a world between Lumina and her, she was less poisonous to be around. The door had been slightly ajar, and I'd been about to knock when I heard her voice coming from inside. She was on the phone, her tone completely different from the broken voice she'd used with the medical staff. This voice was confident, almost gleeful as she spoke to someone called Bullet. "The plan worked perfectly," she'd said, and I'd frozen in place, my hand halfway to the door handle. "Nobody suspects a thing. As far as they know, rogues took Riley and I was just an unfortunate victim who tried to protect him." My blood had turned to ice as I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, straining to hear every word. "It was so easy," Sophia had continued, her voice filled with satisfaction. "The boy trusted me completely. He actually believed I was taking him on some kind of bonding adventure. When I pushed him off that cliff, the look of betrayal in his eyes was almost satisfying." I'd had to cover my mouth with my hand to keep from gasping aloud. She was talking about murdering Riley, her own son, as far as everyone knew, like it was nothing more than disposing of an unwanted object. "This is just like before," she'd said, and my entire world had tilted on its axis. "Just like with Xena. Nobody will ever know what really happened, and I'll get away with it exactly like I did then." Xena? My daughter's name on this monster's lips had nearly sent me into a rage right there in the hospital hallway. My beautiful, vibrant, daughter who'd been found dead 6 years ago with Lumina standing over her body, a bloody knife in her hand. The evidence had seemed so clear, the handprint on the murder weapon a perfect match. But Lumina had maintained her innocence even under alpha command and torture, insisting she'd been unconscious and had no memory of how she'd ended up with the weapon. Chapter 140. Sylvia. We'd released her due to lack of concrete evidence, but I'd never forgiven her. I'd carried that hatred in my heart for 6 long years, blaming her for taking my child away from me. And now I was learning that the real killer had been standing right in front of me, playing the role of the grieving ex-lover while she destroyed my family from within. "You should have seen how pathetic he looked," Sophia had continued on the phone, apparently enjoying reliving Riley's final moments. Crying for his daddy, begging me not to hurt him. It almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. I'd forced myself to step away from the door then, my legs trembling with the effort of staying upright. I'd stumbled down the hallway in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd just learned. Sophia was a murderer, not just of Riley, but of my own daughter. She'd been part of my family for years. I liked her when she dated my son, although I was one of the underlying factors that caused their relationship to go sour because I forced Xenois to mate Lumina because I wanted Lumina tied down in a city where I would draw the shots. I wanted Lumina bound and chained to a pack she wasn't a part of, mated to a man she didn't love, and making her life miserable as a whole because Sho didn't deserve to be happy, not Ihan, my daughter, was dead. But all this while, it had been Sophia who had been playing the victim while she planned her next kill. How did she even kill Xena? She wasn't there then. Or maybe she had done it, planted it on Lumina and fled, and it was done in the woods near the cliff, only with Lumina holding the murder weapon when we finally found them. Now, sitting in my car with that same woman beside me, I had to use every ounce of self-control I possessed to keep from wrapping my hands around her throat. She was still playing her role, dabbing at her eyes with tissues and making soft sounds of distress that were meant to tug at my heartstrings. "I keep thinking I should have fought harder," she whispered as we pulled into my driveway. "Maybe if I'd been braver, if I'd tried to follow them." "You did everything you could," I replied through gritted teeth, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. No one could ask for more from a mother protecting her child. The word mother tasted like poison in my mouth. This woman was no mother. She was a predator who used children as pawns in her twisted games, and I was going to make sure she never hurt another innocent soul. We pulled up to my house and I saw Samuel's silhouette in the front window, probably wondering why I was bringing company home so late. My husband was a good man, gentle and trusting. He never liked me hurting Lumina or putting her down over and over, but he also didn't stop me or make her life more hellish. He left the dirty deeds to me. My husband was too trusting for what was about to happen, but there was no other choice. Some things were more important than protecting the innocent from ugly truths. "Come on," I said, helping Sophia out of the car with false solicitude. "Let's get you inside where it's warm. Samuel will make us some tea, and you can rest as long as you need to." Sophia leaned on me as we walked to the front door, still playing the role of the traumatized victim. But I could feel the tension in her muscles, see the alertness in her eyes as she scanned the surroundings. She was calculating, always planning her next move. The front door opened before we reached it, and Samuel appeared with a confused expression on his weathered face. "Sylvia? What's going on? I thought you were visiting Xenois at the hospital and checking up on Sophia." "Yes, I did," I said carefully, watching his reaction. "There's been an incident. Riley is missing, and she needs somewhere safe to recover." Samuel's face immediately shifted to concern, his natural compassion overriding any questions about the unusual circumstances. Of course. Come in, both of you. Let me get the guest room ready." I helped Sophia settle into our living room, making sure she was comfortable on the couch near the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, and for a moment I saw something else there, a coldness that she couldn't quite hide behind her mask of grief. "Samuel, could you put the kettle on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I think we could all use some tea." As my husband bustled off toward the kitchen, I moved toward the fireplace, ostensibly to add another log to the flames. But my real target was the heavy iron poker that hung beside the hearth, its weight familiar in my hands from years of tending fires. Sophia was absorbed in her phone, probably checking to see if there were any updates about the search for Riley's body. She had no idea that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble, that justice was finally going to catch up with her after 6 long years. I gripped the poker tightly, feeling its solid weight as I turned back toward the woman who had destroyed so many lives. My daughter's face flashed before my eyes. Zena's bright smile, her infectious laugh, all the dreams and possibilities that had been stolen from her by this monster. "Sophia," I said quietly, my voice carrying a finality that made her look up from her phone. She turned toward me with that fake concerned expression still plastered on her face, and I saw the exact moment when she realized what was about to happen. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened to scream, but it was too late. The poker connected with the back of her skull with a sickening crack that echoed through the quiet room. Chapter 141, The Wait. Lumina. I paced the sterile hospital corridor like a caged wolf, my bare feet making soft slapping sounds against the cold linoleum floor. Every muscle in my body was tightened from anxiety, my hands clenched into fists at my sides as I fought the overwhelming urge to burst through those doors and see what was happening to my son. The silence from Ollie's room was loud, which made my heart skip a beat or 4. There were no monitors beeping, no voices calling out instructions, nothing but an eerie quiet that made my skin crawl with dread. I'd been banished from my own child's bedside and forced to wait in this empty hallway while Lynn worked some kind of magic that could either save Ollie's life or kill them both in the process. "Lumina, please," Lynn said softly, reaching out to touch my arm to either offer comfort that I didn't need or to stop me as I made another frantic circuit past the nurse's station. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor. Lynn knows what he is doing. He has been studying magic longer than you think." I stopped mid-stride, whirling around to face her with wild eyes, filled with fear and uncertainty as I gritted my teeth. "But you said it yourself that the magical backlash from his spell could kill anyone else in the room. So why is Zaid still in there? Why didn't he leave when he told everyone else to get out?" Lynn's expression shifted slightly, a mixture of fondness and exasperation passing her face as she thought over the question. After a moment, she shrugged her shoulders in a gesture that was so casual it almost made me laugh despite the circumstances. "Sometimes Zayde is complicated like that," she said with a small smile on her face, like she found it amusing. "He probably thinks or feels that his mate shouldn't be alone doing something this risky. He's stubborn when it comes to protecting the people he cares about, even when that protection might get him killed." Before I could respond to this revelation, a brilliant light suddenly erupted from the direction of Ollie's room. The illumination was so intense that it seemed to penetrate every corner of the hospital, turning the sterile white walls into blazing beacons that hurt to look at directly. I threw my hands up to shield my eyes, but even through my closed eyelids, I could see the light pulsing and dancing like a living thing. The light seemed to last forever, but in reality it probably only lasted for a few seconds before gradually fading back to normal. When I finally lowered my hands and blinked away the spots dancing in my vision, I saw Lynn sitting beside me with her face drained of all color. "Please tell me you imagined that light and nobody else saw it," she whispered, her voice filled with fear. I felt my heart sink at the desperation in her tone. "The light was real, Lynn. I saw it too, and I'm pretty sure anyone within a 5-mile radius saw it as well." Lynn's face went even paler if that was possible. "Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! This is bad, Lumina. This is really, really bad." I was about to ask her what exactly we should be worried about when the elevator doors at the end of the hallway burst open with a loud ding. The sound echoed through the empty corridor like a gunshot, making both of us jump to our feet. A group of people stormed out of the elevator, their footsteps loud as they matched down the hall and made their way toward us. Behind them came more figures, guards in dark uniforms carrying weapons I couldn't identify, their faces hidden behind black masks. Lynn immediately stepped forward as she realized what was happening as her posture shifted into something defensive and dangerous. I could see her wolf rising to the surface, her eyes beginning to glow with supernatural light as she prepared for a fight. "Elders," she said, her voice dropping into a low growl that made my own wolf respond with alertness. "What are you doing here?" The man at the front of the group was tall and imposing, with silver hair and cold eyes that held no warmth or compassion. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "We're here on reports of illegal witchcraft being performed on Pack territory," he announced, his gaze sweeping over both of us with obvious disdain. "We have orders to take any practitioners into custody for questioning and eventual execution." My blood turned to ice at his words. They were here for Lynn, here to arrest and kill the person who was trying to save my son's life. I moved to stand beside Lynn, letting my own wolf energy rise to the surface as I prepared to defend the person who had become our only hope. "You will not take another step," Lynn snarled, her canines extending as her transformation began. "I am the acting Luna of this pack, and I'm ordering you to leave immediately." The elder's expression didn't change, but I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like amusement in his cold eyes. He gestured behind him with one hand, and two more figures were dragged from the elevator. My heart stopped as I realized what I was looking at. Two people in tattered clothes, their hands bound with what looked like lead cuffs, their faces gaunt and hollow from obvious mistreatment. But it was their eyes that gave them away. The same otherworldly quality that I'd seen in Lynn's gaze when they worked magic. They were witches. Captured witches being used as weapons against their own kind. Lynn recognized what she was seeing at the same moment I did, her growl deepening as she prepared to launch herself at the elders. But before she could move, the captive witches raised their bound hands and clenched them into fists. Pain exploded through my chest like nothing I'd ever experienced before. The pressure on my heart increased, and black spots began dancing at the edges of my vision. I tried to fight against the magic holding me, tried to shift into my wolf form, but the pain was too overwhelming. All I could do was gasp and struggle as consciousness slowly slipped away from me. My last coherent thought before darkness claimed me was a desperate prayer for Ollie's safety. Chapter 42. In awe of him. Zadie. I watched in complete awe as Lynn performed what could only be described as a miracle. The air around us was humming with raw magical energy. This was the first time that I had seen a witch work so close to me, and Lynn's magic aura was filled with pure energy, soothing and calming. Not the usual, nefarious, dark, choking energy aura of witches that we often met on the battlefield. I had shut this down without even letting him show me how magic could be used for good, and now I was getting a front row to just how powerful he actually was. The aura was so thick and potent that I could taste it on my tongue and feel electricity dancing across my skin, goosebumps present on every part of my body. Deep down, I knew how dangerous this magic was. Despite the good aura and every instinct I possessed as an alpha was screaming at me to intervene, to protect my mate from the forces he was channeling, but I forced myself to remain still and silent. This was Lynn's domain, his area of expertise, and my interference could mean the difference between life and death for Ollie. So I stood there like a sentinel, watching blood pour from my mate's nose and eyes as he poured everything he had into severing whatever dark connection was slowly murdering an innocent child. There were so many things I wanted to say to him at that moment, so many things that I had kept hidden because I didn't want him to see me as someone who cared about his existence. I wanted to tell him that I didn't hate him, that the way I'd been treating him all these years wasn't about him personally, but about my own inability to accept what the mate bond had given me. I wanted to explain that watching him risk his life like this, not because he cared about Ollie particularly, but because he thought it would make me happy since it concerned Lumina, wasn't what I wanted at all. The truth was, I'd been a coward. For years, I'd treated Lynn like he was somehow less than what I deserved, like the moon goddess had made some kind of cosmic mistake in pairing us together. I'd convinced myself that pursuing Lumina was about genuine feelings. But deep down, I knew it was really about avoiding the complicated reality of being mated to someone who challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. I knew exactly what it felt like to suffer from unrequited love, and I'd been inflicting that same pain on Lynn without even realizing it. Hell, the way we'd first met should have told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person he was. I'd found him in an alley behind a bar, arguing with some asshole who was trying to force him into participating in some kind of public sexual display. At first, I'd thought Lynn was being harassed by a stranger, so I'd done what any decent person would do and punched the guy into next week. It was only afterward that I learned the creep was actually Lynn's boyfriend, and that Lynn had been standing up for himself against someone who was supposed to care about him, but was instead trying to coerce him into doing things that made him uncomfortable. That should have been my first clue that Lynn was someone worth knowing and someone worth respecting. Instead, I'd spent the following years making him feel like he had to prove his worth to me over and over again, like his love wasn't enough, because it came in a package I hadn't expected. Now, watching him literally bleeding for a child who wasn't even ours, putting his own life at risk because he thought it would earn my approval, I felt like the biggest asshole who had ever lived. Lynn deserved so much better than what I'd been giving him. And if we both survived this magical working, I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for my years of emotional neglect. The magical energy in the room suddenly exploded outward like a bomb going off, and I had to throw my hands up to shield my eyes from the brilliant light that filled every corner of the hospital room. Even through my closed eyelids, the illumination was so intense it felt like staring directly into the sun. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power, and I could hear the windows rattling in their frames from the force of whatever Lynn was unleashing. When the light finally began to fade, I lowered my hands to see Lynn stumbling backward, his face pale as death and covered in blood from the magical exertion. His eyes were unfocused, his knees buckling as the massive spell he'd just cast took its toll on his body. I lunged forward just in time to catch him before he hit the floor, wrapping my arms around his thin frame and lowering him gently to the ground. His skin was cold and clammy, his breathing shallow and irregular, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. "Lynn?" I called softly, brushing his dark hair away from his bloodied face. "Are you all right? Talk to me." His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on my face. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but there was satisfaction in his tone despite his obvious exhaustion. "I saved Ollie," he said, a weak smile crossing his lips. "I did it, Zaid. The connection is severed. He's going to be okay." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "You incredible, amazing, stupid man," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You nearly killed yourself doing it." Lynn's smile widened slightly. "Worth it," he murmured, his eyes beginning to drift closed again. "Anything for you." Chapter 143, The Collapse. Zaidi. His words broke something in me as my eyes widened in both hurt and respect. Even my wolf was disappointed in me. He was all in for the bond all along because that's his fated mate, but I never did get over the fact that he was a man. I was extremely homophobic towards Lynn. I just couldn't see myself doing that. Before I could respond to that heartbreaking statement, his body went completely limp in my arms as consciousness finally abandoned him. His breathing evened out into the deep, regular pattern of someone who had pushed their body far beyond its limits and was now paying the price. I was checking his pulse, making sure he was stable, when the door to the hospital room burst open with enough force to bang against the wall. I looked up, expecting to see Lumina and Lynn rushing in to check on Ollie, but instead I found myself staring at a group of stern-faced men in formal pack attire. Elders. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the silver-haired man at the front of the group, along with several other high-ranking pack officials I'd seen at various ceremonies and political gatherings over the years. Behind them stood guards carrying weapons and restraints, and beside them were two figures I didn't recognize. Gaunt, hollow-eyed people whose hands were bound with what looked like lead cuffs. "Alpha Zayde," the lead elder said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Step away from the witch. We're here to take them into custody for crimes against pack law." I tightened my grip on Lynn's unconscious form, my wolf rising to the surface as every protective instinct I possessed kicked into overdrive. "I'm not giving him up," I said firmly, meeting the elder's cold gaze without flinching. "Lynn just saved a child's life. He's not going anywhere." The elder's expression didn't change, but I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like pity in his eyes. "You don't have a choice in this matter, Alpha. The practice of witchcraft on pack territory is forbidden by the oldest laws we have. The punishment is death." He gestured to one of the bound figures beside him, and suddenly I felt an invisible force slam into my body like a freight train. My arms were wrenched away from Lynn as I was lifted off the ground and pinned against the far wall, held there by some kind of telekinetic power that made it impossible to move or even speak. I watched in helpless rage as the guards moved forward and lifted Lynn's limp body from the floor, handling him with no more care than they would show a sack of grain. His head lolled to one side, blood still trickling from his nose, completely vulnerable and defenseless. "You bastards," I managed to choke out, struggling against the magical force holding me captive. "He saved a child. He's not your enemy." The elder stepped closer, his face showing no emotion as he spoke. "The law doesn't make exceptions for good intentions, Alpha. Your mate has committed a crime punishable by death, and by cohabitating with him and allowing him to practice his abilities, you've broken the sacred laws of our people as well." I felt my heart sink as the full implications of what he was saying hit me. "What are you talking about?" "Lynn and Lumina have already been taken into custody as accomplices," he continued matter-of-factly. "They'll be held pending trial, along with your witch. As for you, the only reason you're not being restrained alongside them is because you currently hold the title of Alpha." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "However, the Pack Council will be meeting tomorrow morning to discuss stripping you of that title. Once you're no longer an Alpha, you'll receive the same punishment as the others." The magical force holding me against the wall suddenly released, and I dropped to the floor, gasping. By the time I'd recovered enough to stand, the elders and their guards were already heading toward the door, carrying Lynn's unconscious form between them like a trophy. "Wait," I called out desperately. "At least let me see that he gets medical attention. He's injured from the spell casting." The elder paused at the doorway, glancing back at me with something that might have been contempt. "The witch will receive whatever medical care is necessary to keep him alive for trial, nothing more." And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the hospital room with only Ollie's steady breathing to break the silence. I sank down into the chair beside his bed, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. In the span of a few minutes, I'd lost everything. My mate, my pack, my title, my freedom. All of it was gone because I'd been too stubborn and scared to acknowledge what was right in front of me. Lynn had risked his life to save a child, and instead of being celebrated as a hero, he was being dragged away to face execution. I looked down at Ollie, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, his color already returning to normal, as the magical drain on his life force finally ended. Lynn's sacrifice had worked. The boy was going to live. But at what cost? And what was I supposed to do now, knowing that the person I should have been protecting all along was facing death because of laws I'd never questioned, traditions I'd never challenged? I buried my face in my hands, feeling the weight of years of missed opportunities and wasted chances pressing down on me like a physical burden. Somewhere in the pack's holding cells, Lynn was probably waking up alone and afraid, wondering if I would even try to save him. The answer to that question was simple. Even if everything else in my life had become impossibly complicated, I was going to get him back, no matter what it cost me. Chapter 144, The Race Against Time. Xenos. I stood at the edge of the path, staring down at a scene that seemed to defile everything that I thought I knew about reality. My son, Riley, who I'd been told was dead or dying somewhere in these woods, was lying on the rocks below, alive and breathing. Beside him knelt Thorn, and a woman I didn't recognize, her hands still glowing with residual magical energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. My legs gave out completely, and I found myself sliding down the rocky slope without any regard for the cuts and bruises I was accumulating along the way. All that mattered was reaching Riley, holding him, confirming that this wasn't some cruel hallucination brought on by grief and desperation. When I finally reached the bottom, I immediately scooped Riley into my arms, feeling the solid weight of his small body against my chest. He was real. He was alive. But he was also clearly injured, his skin pale and cold, his breathing shallow and labored. My relief was immediately filled with suspicion as I looked up at the woman who had been tending to him. She was obviously a witch. I could smell it on her, that distinctive scent that every werewolf learned to recognize from childhood. Everything about this situation screamed danger, and my protective instincts kicked into overdrive. "What did you do to him?" I demanded, my voice rough with barely contained aggression. "If you've hurt him in any way—" "Xenois, stop," Thorn interrupted, placing a restraining hand on my arm. "She saved his life. Let me explain everything." For the next several minutes, I listened in growing horror as Thorn laid out the truth of what had happened. Sophia's betrayal, her attempt to murder Riley by pushing him off this very cliff, the magical necklace that had somehow kept him alive, and Carol's intervention that had prevented him from dying alone in the wilderness. Every word felt like a physical blow. The woman I'd trusted with my child had tried to kill him in cold blood. She'd looked me in the eye and lied about rogues, played the role of a grieving mother while secretly celebrating the fact that she thought she'd successfully committed murder. "I don't want to believe this," I said weakly, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. The evidence was right here in front of me. Riley's injuries, the location where he'd been found, the magical residue that still clung to the air around us. "Where is Sophia?" Thorn asked urgently. "I told you to keep an eye on her." I felt my stomach clench with new anxiety as I looked at him and answered. "My mother came to the hospital after she heard the news. She was there for Sophia and to check up on her. She promised to look after Sophia while I went looking for answers." Thorn's expression darkened immediately, not liking the answer that I gave him. "We need to go. Now, your mother likes Sophia, doesn't she? She'd probably protect her and try to deny Sophia did any of this, but Sophia needs to answer for her crimes." I nodded, carefully lifting Riley as we prepared to leave this nightmare scene behind. Carol was already packing up her magical supplies, moving with the efficiency of someone who was used to making quick exits. "Where are you going?" I asked as she shouldered her pack. She gave me a look that clearly suggested I was asking a stupid question. "I'm getting the hell out of here before someone realizes I was trespassing on werewolf territory and decides to make an example of me." I found myself speaking before I'd fully thought through what I was saying. "We need you. I give you my word that you're under my protection." Carol stopped moving, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Is this some kind of trick? Because if you think I'm stupid enough to walk into a pack house surrounded by werewolves who hate my kind, you just performed a second Jesus-level miracle," I said firmly, looking down at Riley's face as he stirred slightly in my arms. "You brought my son back from the dead. As far as I'm concerned, pack laws can go fuck themselves." That got a surprised laugh out of her, and I saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Well, when you put it like that, I suppose I should stick around to make sure he pulls through completely. Breaking that magical connection was tricky work. There could be complications." By the time we reached my car, I was holding Riley close to my chest while Thorn took the driver's seat. My son drifted in and out of consciousness during the drive, occasionally mumbling words that sounded like Ollie, before fading back into semi-awareness. "I'm sorry," I whispered against his hair, feeling tears I couldn't control rolling down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry I wasn't paying attention. I should have protected you better." I tried calling my mother's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried again and again, each unanswered ring making my anxiety spike higher. Something was wrong. Sylvia always answered her phone, especially when she knew I might need her. The worry was eating at me from the inside. I needed to tell my mother the truth about Sophia, needed to warn her that she was harboring a murderer. But would she even believe me? She'd made it clear over the years that she preferred Sophia to Lumina, thought Sophia would make a better mate for me. Would her prejudices blind her to the evidence of Sophia's crimes? I pulled out my phone again and dialed Dr. Martinez, our family physician. She answered on the second ring, her professional voice immediately shifting to concern when she heard the strain in my tone. Dr. Martinez, I need you to assemble a team of medical professionals who are willing to work off the books, I said quickly. Discretion is absolutely essential, and you might be asked to overlook some unconventional treatment methods. There was a pause before she responded. How unconventional are we talking about, Xenois? Chapter 145, Breaking the Laws. Xenois. I hesitated for a moment. If Elena was discovered to be helping me, this would ruin her career. I know that as her alpha, she was obligated to serve me, but this was more than just me and my family combined. This was involving the life of various others who might be charged with accomplices if we get caught. Elena, I said, using her name to let her know that I was speaking to her as Xenois and not just her alpha. I will not lie, this might ruin your career, your life. You can back down now and claim ignorance and you will not be blamed. I won't use my authority to force you to help me against your wishes. Xenois, I am your friend first, then a doctor. I am following you because I want to, and not because I have to. Screw pack laws. What do you want from me? You wouldn't call if this was not urgent, so I'll ask again. How unconventional are we talking? My lips tugged into a smile as I could hear the loyalty firm and present in her voice, and I was very grateful to have her on my side. Seems today, I have been surrounded by powerful women who have been working behind the scenes, first Carol, now Elena. I glanced at Carol in the rearview mirror, noting the way she was monitoring Riley's vital signs with obvious expertise. The kind that might involve using forbidden healing practices, the kind that saves lives when traditional medicine isn't enough. I understand you got a witch in this territory without getting caught. Seems you are finally growing some balls. Where do you need us? I'll text you the address in a few minutes. And doctor, thank you for not asking questions. Some things are more important than protocol, besides I am up for breaking rules anyway, she replied simply. I'll gather my team. After I hung up, Thorne caught my eye in the mirror as he spoke up, having listened to the conversation that was ongoing. We should go to your parents' penthouse instead of your place. They have that fully equipped medical room your father had installed after his heart attack, and nobody would think to look for us there. Plus, we can deal with Sophia all at once, since Sylvia would probably take her back there to comfort her. I nodded, seeing the logic in his suggestion as I closed my eyes and exhaled. Good thinking. More privacy, better medical facilities that we can get without having to head inside the city, and the penthouse is on a large unhabitated expanse of land, so we can confront Sophia without worrying about neighbors calling the police. I tried calling Lumina next, desperate to hear her voice and make sure she and Ollie were safe, and to hear what was going on. But her phone went straight to voicemail as well, the familiar recording making my chest tighten with fresh worry. Then I tried Zadie's personal number, hoping he might be able to give me an update on Ollie's condition. Voicemail again. This isn't right, I said aloud, my voice tight with growing panic, as I tried not to start going dark with my thoughts. Everything is going to be fine. No one is answering their phones. Something's wrong. Carol's voice came from the back seat, sounding grim and knowing. That's not good news at all. I'm betting there was a witch helping Ollie, probably performing some kind of healing ritual. If that's the case, then Alpha Zeta agreed to let forbidden practices happen under his authority. She paused, and I could see her thinking through the implications in the rearview mirror. If the light that showed up here when I broke Riley's magical connection also showed up in Zeta's territory, Thorne came to the same horrible realization I was reaching. Then we just fucked up everyone's life, because that kind of magical display wouldn't be hidden if it happened in a hospital right in the center of the city. My blood ran cold as I understood what they were saying. The magic that had saved Riley's life had also created a beacon that would have been visible for miles around. If a similar display had occurred while someone was helping Ollie, then everyone involved would now be under scrutiny from pack authorities who had zero tolerance for witchcraft. Lumina could be in custody. Zayde could be facing charges for allowing magical practices in his territory, and I had no way of knowing what was happening to any of them because no one was answering their phones. "Drive faster," I told Thorn, clutching Riley closer to my chest as my son stirred restlessly in my arms. "I'm already doing 20 over the speed limit," he replied, but I could hear him pressing harder on the accelerator. "We need to get to my parents' place, deal with Sophia, and then figure out how to help Lumina and the others," I said, my mind racing through possible scenarios and contingency plans. "Carol, how long do you think it would take for pack authorities to respond to reports of illegal magical activity? If they saw the kind of light display I'm imagining, they'd mobilize immediately," she said grimly. "Witches are considered an existential threat to werewolf society. They wouldn't waste time with investigations or due process." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a physical burden. By saving Riley's life, we might have inadvertently condemned everyone else I cared about to punishment or death. But I couldn't regret it. Looking down at my son's face, seeing the color slowly returning to his cheeks as Carol's healing magic continued to work through his system, I knew I'd make the same choice again. Now I just had to figure out how to save everyone else before it was too late. Riley's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused but aware enough to whisper, "Daddy, where's Ollie?" "I'm going to find him," I promised, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm going to make sure everyone is safe." I just hoped I wasn't already too late. Chapter 146, The Blackwood Penthouse. Xenoeus. The convoy of medical vehicles arrived at my parents' penthouse at exactly the same time we did, which meant that Elena had done the impossible, assembling together a team in this kind of circumstances. But it seemed like she didn't tell them much about the situation on the ground, as I could see the wariness in the doctor's eyes as they took in Carol's presence here. They truly weren't expecting to see a witch here, and kept glancing at me, probably wondering if my senses had been diluted or I was probably under some sort of spell. Dr. Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle, looking every bit the professional that she was, especially with her composure, but I caught the way her eyes lingered on Carol with obvious suspicion. Sure, she had known what she was walking into, but that didn't stop her from having her own personal opinions about the whole thing. The other members of her team were even less subtle about their discomfort, clustering together like chicks in a pen and speaking in low whispers. But I clearly didn't need my enhanced hearing to know what they were saying about her. "This is Carol," I said quickly, trying to put off any potential conflicts before they could blow up. "She's the one who kept Riley alive until we could find him. She'll be assisting with his treatment. I trust you all will treat her as one of your own and not someone to be wary of." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly, her professional skills and training overriding her personal reservations about working with someone who was clearly not entirely human. "Whatever works, I will be sure to work to the best of my capabilities with her," she said simply. "Let's see the patient." Amber, one of the younger doctors on the team, immediately stepped forward from where they were standing and gently took Riley from my arms. Her touch was confident and certain in a way, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders as I watched her begin her beginning assessment of Riley, noting down the most important things. "Pulse is weak but steady," she murmured to her colleagues as her hands kept roaming, her fingers brushing against his skin gently like she was afraid to break something. "Breathing is shallow but improving. We need to get him to a proper medical facility immediately." Thorn was already moving toward the penthouse entrance, pulling out his key ring to unlock the front door and let everyone in. The building's security system recognized him immediately, and we were able to get everyone inside quickly instead of using the bell and ringing up my family. The penthouse was eerily quiet as we entered, which should have been my first warning that something was wrong and I needed to be cautious from here on out. My parents' home was never completely silent. Not ever. There was always the sound of the television or music playing or my mother moving around organizing something or my father having an argument with her about new places to visit. but always ends up giving in to her because he was much of a gentleman to actually say no to her. I glanced at the grandfather's clock in the hallway and saw that it was after 2 a.m. Maybe they have retired early for the night. That was a plausible explanation. Elena led her team and Carol toward the medical wing my father had installed after his heart attack a few years ago, their voices fading as they disappeared down the hallway with Riley. And soon they were gone, and I could only pray that they would be able to heal Riley from this. I wanted to follow them, to hover anxiously while they worked, but I had more pressing concerns that needed my immediate attention, and I didn't want to hinder them from doing their works properly. Inasmuch as I hated to admit this, dealing with Sophia first and locking her up for her crimes were more important than letting her get away with this. "Where is everyone?" I asked Thorne quietly, noting the way our footsteps echoed through the empty living spaces. Before he could answer my question, my father appeared from the direction of the kitchen, looking harried and uncomfortable in a way that immediately put me on edge. His eyes seemed to be darting around like he was trying to hide something from me. Samuel Blackwood, my father, was usually the picture of calm composure, but right now he looked like a man who was struggling with some kind of internal conflict as he kept running his hands together. "Xenois," he said, relief present in his voice as he saw me and pulled me into a brief hug before he stepped back and continued speaking. "You shouldn't be here right now. Your mother is helping Sophia cope with Riley's disappearance. They're having tea and talking through her trauma. The poor girl is in a very fragile state." I felt my jaw clench at his words as I felt new anger build up in my chest, hearing those words from my father. Sophia was still here manipulating my mum, who had no idea the evil things that she had done. "Dad, I need to talk to Mom immediately. There are things about Sophia that she needs to know, things that can't wait until tomorrow." Samuel moved to block our path toward the guest wing, his expression growing more desperate with worry and small panic as he pressed. "Son, please, can't this wait? Sophia has been through enough today without having to deal with more stress and upheaval." "No, it can't wait," I said firmly, trying to step around him. "Mom is in danger. Sophia isn't who we thought she was." My father reached out to physically stop me from passing, which was so unlike him that it made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. Samuel had never been the type to use physical force to resolve conflicts, preferring diplomacy and reasoned discussion to confrontation. That was when the scream rang out through the house. Chapter 147, Family Secrets. Xenois. It was a sound of pure agony, high-pitched and desperate, echoing off the walls with enough force to make me wince. But it wasn't my mother's voice, it was Sophia's, and she sounded like she was being tortured. Thorne and I exchanged a single look before we both moved at the same time, pushing past my startled father and racing toward the source of the screaming. My heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and confusion as we ran through the hallways, following the sounds of distress to their origin. We burst through the door of the main guest room to find a scene that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. Sophia was tied to a chair in the center of the room, her body covered in what looked like hours' worth of well-planned-out injuries. Her face was swollen and bloody, and she was barely recognizable. Her scent was sour and bitter, which made my nose wrinkle unconsciously at the scent. Her clothes were torn and stained, her hands bent at angles that clearly showed evidence multiple broken bones, and standing over her with a red-hot poker pressed against her chest was my mother. Sylvia looked up as we entered, her expression showing nothing but mild annoyance at the interruption. There was no guilt or shame in her eyes, no sign that she felt any remorse for what she was clearly in the middle of doing. "Really, Samuel?" she said, rolling her eyes in exasperation. "I gave you one simple job. Keep them away until I was finished. Was that so difficult?" I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind completely unable to reconcile the image of my elegant, refined mother with the scene of calculated torture playing out in front of me. This was Sylvia, who hosted charity luncheons and organized pack social events. This was the woman who had raised me to believe in honor and justice and doing the right thing. "Mom?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. Sophia's head turned toward me, hope blazing in her battered features as she saw potential rescue arriving. "Xenois," she cried, fresh tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "Thank God you're here! Your mother has gone completely insane. She's been torturing me for hours, saying the most horrible things." "We found Riley," Thorn interrupted, his voice cold and hard as he stared at Sophia with obvious disgust. "We know what you did to him. Xenois isn't under your spell anymore." I watched Sophia's face change as she realized that her carefully planned manipulation and lies were no longer working on me any longer. I saw the instant her eyes made the realization on her own. The fake vulnerability disappeared, replaced by something calculating and desperate. That's when my mother spoke up again, her voice casual as if she was discussing the weather. "Oh, good, you found the boy. I was wondering how long it would take you to piece together that this bitch tried to murder him." "You knew?" I asked, staring at her in shock. She knew and didn't say anything at the hospital, only told me to go out and find Thorn. "I know a lot of things," Sylvia replied, pressing the poker a little deeper into Sophia's chest and earning another scream. "For instance, I know she's the one who killed Zedzina 6 years ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. My sister. My beautiful, vibrant sister who had been found dead with Lumina standing over her body, a bloody knife in her hand. "That's impossible," I said weakly, but even as I spoke the words, I could see the truth written in Sophia's expression. She must have realized that her time for playing innocent was over, because suddenly she was moving. The ropes that had been holding her to the chair somehow came loose, and she shoved my mother aside with desperate strength before bolting toward the door. Rage like nothing I'd ever experienced flooded through my system as I lunged forward to stop her. My hand shot out and grabbed her arm, intending to pull her back into the room where she could face justice for her crimes. There was a sickening tearing sound, followed by Sophia's scream of absolute agony as she kept running while I remained standing in place. I looked down at my hand in horror and disbelief. I was holding Sophia's right arm, the entire limb torn off at the shoulder, blood still pumping from the severed arteries. "Oh, for fuck's sake," my mother said, sounding more annoyed than disturbed by the gruesome scene. "Now I'm going to have to replace this rug, and you're paying for my dry cleaning bill." Thorn started to move toward the door, clearly intending to pursue Sophia, but my mother held up one hand to stop him. "Let her go," she said with a dismissive wave. "It just became a cat-and-mouse game, and it wouldn't be fun if we caught her too quickly. Besides, she's not going to get very far with only one arm." Thorn stared at her in obvious disbelief. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he muttered. My father appeared in the doorway behind us, took one look at the severed arm I was still holding, and calmly walked over to take it from me like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Are we doing the usual hunting game, dear?" he asked my mother pleasantly, wrapping the dismembered limb in a towel he'd apparently brought for exactly this purpose. "Of course," Sylvia replied, beginning to clean blood off the poker with another towel. "Give her a few hours head start, then we'll track her down properly. Make it sporting." I stared at both of my parents, feeling like I was seeing them clearly for the first time in my life. "I was born into a family of psycho killers," I said to myself, the words coming out louder than I'd intended. My mother heard me and laughed, the sound bright and cheerful and completely at odds with the torture chamber she'd created in the guest room. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, patting my cheek affectionately with a hand that still had blood under the fingernails. "We prefer enthusiastic problem solvers." Chapter 148, The Unexpected Betrayal. I woke up to the sensation of cold stone beneath my cheek and a splitting headache that felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my skull. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there, but as consciousness slowly returned, the events of the previous night came flooding back in horrifying detail. The elders, the captive witches, the crushing pain in my chest as magical hands squeezed my heart nearly to the point of stopping. The look of cold satisfaction on Simon's face as he watched us writhing in agony on the hospital floor. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, my head spinning from the movement, and took in my surroundings. Stone walls, iron bars, the musty smell of dampness and despair. We were in the packed dungeons, the place where they kept prisoners awaiting trial or execution. Beside me, Lumina was still unconscious, her face pale and drawn even in sleep. I reached out and shook her shoulder gently, not wanting to startle her but needing to know she was okay. "Lumina," I whispered urgently. "Wake up! We need to figure out what's happening." Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her features before memory returned and her expression shifted to panic. "Lynn, where are we? What happened to Ollie?" "We're in the dungeons," I said grimly, helping her sit up against the stone wall. "The elders took us after they found out about Lynn helping your son. I don't know what happened to Ollie or Lynn or Zaid." The mention of my twin brother's name sent a spike of terror through my chest. Lynn had been unconscious when they'd taken him, weak and bleeding from the magical working he'd performed. In his condition, he'd be completely defenseless against whatever they were planning to do to him. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to the iron bars that separated us from the corridor beyond. "Hey!" I shouted at the guard sitting at a desk about 20 feet away. "Let us out of here. I demand to speak to Alpha Zayde immediately." The guard didn't even look up from the paperwork he was reading. "Quiet down in there," he said in a bored tone. "We're under strict orders not to listen to anything you have to say." I grabbed the bars and shook them, the metal clanging loudly in the confined space. "I'm the acting Luna of this pack. You can't just ignore me." "You're a prisoner awaiting trial," the guard replied calmly. "Your authority means nothing down here." I felt panic rising in my throat as the reality of our situation really hit me. We weren't just being detained for questioning. We were being treated like criminals, like enemies of the pack. Whatever was happening above ground, it was serious enough that even my position as Luna couldn't protect me. "Where's Zaid?" I demanded, but the guard had already returned his attention to his papers, clearly done with our conversation. I slumped back against the stone wall beside Lumina, who was staring at the ceiling with tears streaming down her face. "He'll come for us," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "Zayde wouldn't let this happen. He knows Lynn was trying to save Ollie's life." I wanted to share her optimism, but years of watching Zayde struggle with his feelings about my twin had taught me not to put too much faith in his protective instincts where Lynn was concerned. "I don't know, Lumina," I said honestly. "Zayde has never fully accepted Lynn. Now that Lynn has broken pack law, publicly and obviously, I doubt Zayde will interfere." The look of devastation that crossed her face made me wish I'd kept that thought to myself, but lying to her wouldn't help anyone. We needed to face the reality of our situation if we had any hope of surviving it. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Neither of us had any way to tell time in the windowless dungeon, but eventually the quality of light filtering down from the upper levels suggested that it was late afternoon. My stomach was cramping with hunger, and my throat was parched from thirst, but no one had come to offer us food or water. Then, finally, we heard footsteps echoing from the stairwell that led down to the dungeons. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with the measured pace of people on official business. I immediately rushed back to the bars, hope and terror warring in my chest as I waited to see who was coming. When the group finally came into view, my heart nearly stopped. Zayde was there, but he wasn't alone. Beside him walked 3 of the elders from the night before. Simon, who had orchestrated our capture, along with Matthias and Gerald. All 3 were elderly men with stern faces and eyes that held no warmth or compassion, the kind of pack leaders who valued tradition and law above everything else. "Zaid," I called out, gripping the bars so tightly my knuckles went white. "Thank God you're here. Where's Lynn? Is he okay?" Zayde's expression was carefully neutral as he approached our cell, but I could see the strain around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that suggested he was fighting some internal battle. When he spoke, his voice was formal and distant, nothing like the man I'd known for years. "Lynn is under investigation," he said without meeting my eyes. "He's unconscious and being kept in isolation until he's well enough to stand trial." Simon stepped forward with a cold smile that made my skin crawl. "Alpha Zayde has learned his lesson," he said smugly. "He's promised to personally oversee Lynn's prosecution tomorrow morning in front of the entire pack." I felt the blood drain from my face as his words sank in. "Zayde, tell me that's not true," I whispered, searching his face for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But Zayde finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my heart break into 1,000 pieces. "It's the right thing to do," he said quietly. "Lin broke the law. He used witchcraft on Pact territory, endangered innocent people with his magic. Justice has to be served." Chapter 149, A Promised Death. Lin. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my vision blur with tears. Behind me, I heard Lumina slam against the bars with enough force to bend the metal slightly. She was furious as well, hearing the despicable words that was pouring from Zayde's mouth. "He did it for my son," she screamed, her wolf rising to the surface, as her eyes began to glow golden as the bars creaked underneath her hands, which made some elders step back, but she was so focused on her pain and anger that she barely noticed what she was doing. Lin risked his life to save Ollie. "How can you forsake him like this?" She yelled at Zayde, feeling betrayed and hurt about his words. I knew this was going to hurt their friendship. Lumina had always believed Zayde to be someone who would do whatever it takes, even if it's said to be wrong. Seeing him shatter her trust in him was painful. Zayde flinched at her words, but didn't back down from his stance. He kept on speaking, trying to soothe Lumina from what he was doing. "Ollie is safe," he said firmly, as if that was going to make his betrayal okay. "He's recovering well and will be under my protection. But Lin chose to break old pack laws. I have to put the safety and stability of my pack first. That's what being an alpha means." Something inside me snapped completely when I heard this. All the years of watching Lin love this man who couldn't love him back, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Zayde treated my brother like he was somehow less than what he deserved, all the pain and loneliness I'd seen in Lin's eyes when he thought no one was looking, it all came pouring out in a wave of pure rage. "I'm going to kill you," I snarled, pressing my face against the bars as I stared into Zayde's eyes. "Do you hear me, you fucking coward? I'm going to murder you the first chance I get. You'd better make sure I die tomorrow, because if I survive this, I swear on everything I hold sacred that I will end your miserable life." Zayde's carefully blank expression cracked slightly, and I saw pain flicker across his features. He looked hurt by my admission as he stepped forward a bit. "Lin, don't you dare say my name?" I spat at him. It landed on his face and he refused to clean it. "Don't you dare pretend you care about any of us. You're willing to watch the man who loves you die because you're too much of a coward to stand up to these old bastards. I curse myself for not stopping Lin from loving you all these years. You never deserved him. He always had hope out for you, always the first to stand on your side, and this is how you repay him? Are you that eager to get rid of him that you are willing to close your eyes and ignore? This is bullshit and wrong." Simon was watching our exchange with obvious satisfaction, clearly enjoying the destruction of whatever relationship had existed between Zayde and our family. "Tomorrow morning, both of you will be brought up to witness the proceedings," he said pleasantly. "As accomplices to magical crimes, you'll face charges as well, though Alpha Zayde has managed to negotiate reduced sentences for you." Zayde nodded stiffly, still avoiding my eyes. "I was able to convince them that you were both manipulated rather than willing participants. Instead of death, you'll face exile and magical binding to prevent any future incidents." "How generous," I said with as much venom as I could manage. "So you'll let us live just long enough to watch you murder my brother." "I can't let my mate die," Zayde said quietly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his voice carried real emotion. "No matter what else happens, I won't let them kill you, Lin. I'm doing what I have to do to save your life." The twisted logic of his statement made me want to scream. He was going to murder the man I loved most in the world in order to save me from the consequences of trying to save a child's life. The irony was so bitter I could taste it on my tongue. "I'd rather die than live knowing you killed him," I whispered, my rage suddenly giving way to devastation. "I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life knowing that the person who was supposed to protect him was the one who destroyed him." Zayde turned and walked away without another word, the elders following behind him like vultures circling a fresh kill. Their footsteps echoed up the stairwell until we were alone again with the guard, who had watched the entire exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly entertaining play. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold stone floor, and then I broke down completely. The sobs that tore from my throat were raw and primal, the sound of a heart being ripped apart by betrayal and grief. Beside me, Lumina wrapped her arms around my shoulders and cried with me, both of us mourning for the people we were about to lose and the futures that had been stolen from us. Somewhere above us, my twin brother was lying unconscious and alone, unaware that the man he loved was preparing to oversee his execution. And there was nothing I could do to save him, nothing I could do to change the course of events that would tear our small family apart forever. All I could do was cry and rage and promise myself that if I survived tomorrow's proceedings, Zadie would pay for what he was about to do. Even if it cost me my own life, I would make sure justice was served for the man who had thrown away the greatest love he would ever know. Chapter 150, Ollie's Awake. Zadie. I watched Ollie's eyes flutter open, relief flooding through me as consciousness returned to his small face. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling in silence, and I could see his mind working to piece together what had happened to him. Then tears began rolling down his cheeks, and he whispered a single word that made my chest tighten with sympathy. "Riley?" I immediately moved closer to his bedside, reaching out to brush the tears from his face with gentle fingers. "Hey there, little man," I said softly, trying to project calm reassurance despite the turmoil churning in my own chest. "You're going to be just fine. The spell has been broken. You're safe now." Ollie closed his eyes and shook his head weakly against the pillow. "I didn't want them to break it," he whispered, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him. I frowned in confusion, not understanding what he meant. The magical connection that had been draining his life force was gone. Wasn't that what we'd all wanted? "Ollie, what do you mean? You're better now. You're not sick anymore." He opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression far too old for his young face. "Where's Mama?" he asked, completely ignoring my question about the spell. I hesitated, my throat constricting as I thought about Lumina sitting in a cold cell below the pack house, waiting for a trial that would determine her fate. I couldn't tell a child that his mother was in prison, that she might be exiled or worse because she'd tried to save his life. She's fine," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "She'll come see you soon, I promise." Ollie nodded slowly, accepting my words without question in the trusting way that only children could manage. Before I could say anything else, there was a soft knock on the door, and Dr. Lily entered with her usual professional smile. "Well, look who's awake," she said cheerfully, moving to check his vital signs with practiced efficiency. "How are you feeling, Ollie? Any pain or discomfort?" "Okay," Ollie replied in a monotone voice that immediately caught the doctor's attention. She tried asking him several more questions about his physical condition, but every response was the same, single syllables delivered without any emotion or enthusiasm. Even when she mentioned that he could probably go home soon, he just shrugged and turned his face toward the wall. Dr. Lily caught my eye and gestured for me to step aside with her. "I'm concerned about his mental state," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that Ollie couldn't hear. "Physical trauma aside, he's showing signs of depression or emotional withdrawal. It's not uncommon in children who've experienced significant medical trauma, but he should probably speak with someone qualified to help him process what happened." I nodded, though my mind was already racing ahead, the events I needed to orchestrate in the next few hours. "I'll make sure he gets whatever help he needs," I promised. Another knock on the door interrupted us, and Rivers stepped inside with a young woman I recognized as one of the pack's most trusted caregivers. Talia had helped with several other children in similar situations, and I knew she'd be gentle with Ollie while I dealt with the nightmare unfolding in the rest of my territory. "Ollie," I said, returning to his bedside and crouching down so we were at eye level. "This is Talia. She's going to stay with you while I take care of some important pack business. She's really nice, and she knows lots of good stories." Ollie looked at Talia with polite disinterest, then turned his attention back to me. His behavior was a source of worry. This was someone who was usually very animated, even when angry with something he didn't like. This wasn't the kid who had bit him in anger after abandoning his father on the rainy road, or stood his ground and told me to back off from his mum, that she was spoken for. Even the boy who had sneaked into my office and called his father without permission, defying pack rules, wasn't found anymore. The kid in front of me staring at me with empty eyes seemed devoid of happiness and actually truly depressed. "When will Mama come?" he asked again. "Soon," I repeated, hating myself for the continued deception, but I knew that making Ollie even more upset by saying the truth was going to cause more harm than good at this point. "I promise you'll see her soon." Rivers cleared his throat meaningfully, and I knew my time was up. The pack would be gathering for the trial, and I needed to be there to see this charade through to its conclusion. "It's time for the meeting," Rivers said quietly. "Everyone has been assembled as you requested. They are all waiting for you. I should warn you, Elder Simon is beside himself with anticipation. He is eagerly waiting for the events to unfold. Are you sure you are ready to do this?" I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady as the weight of what I was about to do settled on my shoulders. "Yes, I have already told the elders that I will prosecute the witch myself. I can't be found backing down from this. Besides, have you found all the evidence we discussed?" "Yes, Alpha," Rivers replied with a slight smile on his face as he nodded his head briefly before adding, "Everything has been prepared exactly as you specified. As soon as you say the word, everyone will know just what sort of things have been going on behind their backs." I followed Rivers out of the hospital and toward the pack house, my mind focused on the performance I was about to give. The main gathering hall was packed with pack members, all of them talking in hushed voices about the unexpected and sudden trial they were about to witness. The witches' trial had always been a rare event in our land because of the lack of witches. Well, lack of witches who broadcast their true self without hiding it. The last witch trial had been when I was a kid, and I watched my father command a woman to be burnt alive. Well, technically, she had indeed tried to murder the Alpha's heir me, so I felt it was justified. I could feel their curiosity and excitement, their eagerness to see justice served against the witch who had supposedly threatened their community.